Good afternoon and welcome to this Northern Virginia Economic Development Alliance webinar series, Catalyst for Change. I'm John Jacobs. I'm your host, moderator for this series. For the entire series, a series of 10 episodes. This is number 5 in our series, for those keeping count. And we have a wonderful conversation today. And then I'm going to take you through, as I do with every webinar, and give you a bit of a context and some bullet points so that you can have a better understanding of the dimensions of the discussion. So let me do that. I'll share my screen. It may take me a moment. Before I even do that, Q&A, I always forget to say this, we are taking questions. So please, as you go through the panel discussion, just go ahead and posit those questions on the, if you have a bottom nav bar, if you mouse down, you'll be able to see a nav bar pop up, Q&A. If you have a Mac, it's on the top of your screen, I believe, just to be different. So nevertheless, I think Niall's indicating it's on the bottom as well, so we'll get into that. But let me just go ahead and share my screen and take you through just a few bullet points, if I may. All right, here we go. And of course, I have to maximize our friend here into the show mode. So, Catalyst for Change: How Companies Turn Disruption into Success. This is an episode number 5 entitled Actionable Knowledge. We're going to focus on a company called Blank Slate, how Blank Slate keeps companies improving. Blank Slate is located in Arlington, Virginia. So we have Arlington, Virginia on as well. Here's some quick numbers that I think will give us some context to the discussion. There's quite a few, but I'll just sort of rattle through these. Today, or certainly with some research, only 12% of workers apply knowledge from their on-the-job training that they experience. 70% of workers report that they have no mastery of the skills needed to complete their work. This is from Gartner research. Next bullet, only 25% of survey respondents to a McKinsey survey felt the job training improved their individual performance. Yet, this I found interesting, 87% of millennials do value in-house development and training to improve their career advancement opportunities. This is a fascinating one. This is from the Bureau of Labor Statistics in the US. Companies with 100 to 500 employees hold only 12 minutes of in-house training on average every year. 12 minutes, not 12 hours. 85% of employees report that they are either not engaged or, interestingly, actively disengaged. I'm not quite sure I know what the definition of that is. That's from a Gallup survey of 2017. Only 27% of learning and development professionals, L&D, felt that their CEOs were an active champion of learning. This is a LinkedIn poll from just a couple of years ago. The net result from a profitability perspective is a $7 trillion loss in productivity due to disengaged workers. Here's a number from World Economic Forum report in 2018. No less than 54% of all employees will require a retraining or reskilling or upskilling by 2022. So that's quickly approaching, obviously. And lastly, 40.6% state that COVID-19, they being the learning and development professionals, state that COVID-19 has caused them to focus on operational changes rather than measurement. This is from Leo Watershed, most recent 2021 report. As I mentioned, we have a great panel today. I'm going to quickly mention their names and go through a bit of a bio. Alex Hoslacker, Director of Business Development with Blank Slate Technologies. Nigel Payne, author and change leader based in London. And Marion Marquez, Director of Business Investment with Arlington Economic Development, obviously within Arlington County. I'm going to stop sharing my screen now, and there are the live people celebrating the greatness of Zoom. Let me go ahead and read a bit of a bio, if I may. I'll begin with Alex Hoslacker. So Alex joined Blank Slate Technologies in 2017, currently leads all business development and partnership opportunities for the company. Prior to joining Blank Slate, Alex served as Vice President for the International Division of Kepler Speakers. Kepler is a global speakers bureau, top political, economic, and social leaders. As a personal, I was in his bio, but I'm going to keep it here. because I found it interesting. Since 2016, Alex has served as a referee for the U.S. Rowing Association. So that's really cool. Nigel Payne with over 25 years of experience in corporate learning. Nigel is a regular speaker, writer, and broadcaster on the topics of development, technology, and leadership. From 2002 through 2006, Nigel headed up the BBC's learning and development operation. Following this, he started his own company, NigelPayne.com Limited, that focuses on building great workplaces. He teaches with doctoral programs. He has written 3 recent books, presents a monthly TV program entitled Learning Now TV, and shares a weekly podcast with Martin Cousins called From Scratch. Marian Marquez is Director of Business Investment with Arlington Economic Development. In this role, Marian oversees Arlington's efforts for business recruitment and retention, international trade, entrepreneur support, and catalyzing the innovation economy. Remember that phrase, innovation economy. We'll come back on that one. Among her achievements, Marian contributed heavily to the successful recruitment of Amazon's HQ2 headquarters in Arlington, and she has helped stand up or start the county's international and business retention strategies. Prior to joining AED, Marian held roles with ExxonMobil Corporation, as well as the federal government with the U.S. Trade and Development Agency. Panelists, thank you all very much. How to get through that, get through the panel discussion, so here we go. And Alex, if I may, I'm gonna begin with you.
Absolutely.
Since you're in my upper left corner, that's how we decide these things. Who's ever in the upper left corner wins. How would you describe the role that Blank Slate plays with regard to your client organizations?
Yeah, so thank you again for having me on today. And definitely all the statistics and data you showed, none of them actually surprised me in any way or form. We measure knowledge as a company, but not really in the academic sense of taking an assessment after you watch a webinar and then you get this little certificate and you move on with your life. But we measure knowledge in real time. And our software that we've built runs on an algorithm that we're able to actually predict who's going to forget what information, and also importantly, when that forgetting is going to happen. And using the predictive analytics that we have on the back end, this helps us identify and also close those knowledge gaps before they actually happen on an individual basis. The way we really help companies is by taking a different look at their procedures and processes and training, and really change the way that they look at human capital overall. I know we waste a lot of time on training, as the statistics you showed certainly prove. But this is where we come in to make this process a bit more effective, a bit more efficient. And it is all backed by science. So we actually recently had Yale and Quinnipiac University do an independent peer review on our software, which got published earlier on this month, backing up all the science. So it sounds futuristic, being able to predict all this stuff, but there is actual real science behind it.
You know, this series focuses on companies that have pivoted due to an external factor, a macroeconomic factor, a health factor, whatever it might be. And I remember in our early conversations, we talked about the retail segment being very important to you as a major client sector. Then this thing, COVID, comes along, and retail essentially is shut down across the heck, most of the world, in many countries at least. What was your initial reaction, you and the rest of the management team, and how did you then decide to pursue other sectors?
Yeah, so retail is certainly one of our larger sectors prior to COVID, and we definitely, took a pretty big hit on that. We were lucky to have other verticals that we were already in. We kind of got our foot in the door as a company in academia, as well as on the corporate side when it comes to some of the compliance training, but also we had early interaction with a few clients on the law enforcement side. So realizing that retail wasn't going to be viable for the near future, at least, of course, none of us knew that it's, a year ago today that pretty much COVID happened and companies started shutting down and sending employees home. But we saw these other sectors where we had use cases where it was working. Law enforcement, specifically compliance, health and safety, that sort of stuff. But I think importantly, we were able to take a step back from our software and really see ourselves as a data company more so than a training and learning ed tech company. And I think making that realization allowed us to really move a lot of our resources looking at other industries, other verticals, and seeing how we can help clients apart from just the retail and corporate sector.
All right. When I think of data analytics, it's a bit dry as a topic. I mean, from my perspective, obviously not if you're a data.
I get really excited about it. I don't know about you, John.
And well, you should, right? And I get, what I get excited about is what one does with the data and how it's applied. And so I want to ask you about that. So if it's testing and measurement, you go to your website, it says test and measurement, right? And how do your clients truly actualize that data? What are some examples you might have?
Yeah, so we really do try and break up the mundane part of training. At the very onset of the user experience, we're probably one of the few, if not the only software company that will openly say, I actually want you as a user to spend less and less time on my software. This means that it's working. We get that buy-in because the engagement is these little micro interactions. But the data is really there that we can send any organization with any type of organizational structure. We can send the C-level down to the local regional manager, a customized report on their people and really what is in the brains of their people in real time. Going back to the standard assessments, it's great that you watched the webinar and passed the test 86 days ago. Do you actually remember taking that webinar, today? Probably not. So it's keeping that information not only front of mind, and we're able to actually prove a 200% increase in retention for a third of the time on the user side. But it's the data analytics where we start to find these efficiencies. One of our law enforcement clients last year, they were coming up on doing their TASER training. And they usually spent 5 hours doing TASER training every 6 months. It was on their calendar for Friday. And they looked at the data and realized that their entire population was at a 98% accuracy on all the content for their TASER training. So you have to ask yourself the question, do I really need to spend 5 hours on this when my entire population can teach this course? And that allows us to then look at other knowledge gaps, allocate that time, or maybe just let people do their job and not force them to do yet another training. It's different for every organization, but certainly we do bring the value in. The return on investment is calculable pretty quickly.
I think about if I were on the receiving end of the training, and you mentioned the frequency, it's sort of a high frequency scenario for the individual taking the training, I'd have some exhaust related to that. And I would say, oh my gosh, here comes, it's my daily training. But in truth, what's your philosophy there? Is it that more frequent training helps ingrain the knowledge, or that it's more of a run rate behavior that you can assess somebody more readily?
Yeah, it's the science is really based on a combination of the forgetting curve along with spaced repetition. So it is that spaced repetition that is certainly part of the package, but also incorporating the forgetting curve and the data that we have using our probabilistic models allows us to really pinpoint, if the four of us each have 150 flashcards to go through, right? Once the system starts to learn a bit more about us, it can pick out that, Marion, here's 3 cards for you to review today. John, here's 2.
Nigel, I think what Alex was sort of I was heading toward with this idea of a learning organization. And I don't know what that is. You do. So would you tell us what a learning organization is and how is it distinguished from, well, I would say a non-learning organization?
If we go back to Marion's innovation economy, you cannot have an innovation economy with people who don't constantly learn, relearn, learn from each other and solve problems day by day, week by week, month by month by sharing their knowledge. In essence, That is a learning organization. A learning organization is one that uses the smartness of their staff as a competitive advantage. And that doesn't mean that you hire PhDs from Harvard. What it means is that you create an environment where not only can people learn, that's one thing, it's that they are willing and able to share their learning and also admit what they don't know, to openly admit to making mistakes, so that the whole organization is a kind of fervor of sharing, engagement, problem solving, where no one person knows it all and no one person knows nothing. So that it's about what Nadella talked about in Microsoft when he switched Microsoft from being a know-it-all organization to a learn-it-all organization. Know-it-all organizations don't learn, and they will never become part of the innovation economy. Learning organizations have at least got that option. So the key thing is that you bring insight and information from outside, you share it around the organization rapidly, and it's about action. You take action as a result. So learning and work become one thing. They're not separate. You don't do learning and then you do work. Learning is work, work is learning. The learning comes from work and it goes back into work. And it does it by cooperative relationships, people admitting what they don't know and learning, so that everyone from the CEO down is both a teacher and a learner. There is no one who can't teach, and there is no one who is so unbelievably well informed that they can't learn. That's the essence of a learning organization.
Well, here's a question. Even though one may be willing and desiring to learn something, a lot of these environments are not designed for putting yourself at risk.
Absolutely right. Yeah, that's true. That's quite true, John. That's a very, very important point. And you'll never get a learning organization where there's fear and where there's a lack of trust. Why would I ever admit to you that I don't know something or I made a mistake when I don't trust you? I wouldn't open my mouth. I'd invent something. I'd deflect the blame to Marion or to Alex. I wouldn't admit it.
Alex,
that's the okay. We'll go for Alex. But that is the way many organizations operate. They work in this political environment where no one can ever admit they're wrong, so that therefore, by definition almost, no one learns. And when no one learns, then you make mistakes, and then you cover up the mistakes and you make more mistakes. And in the kind of environment that we've got now, which is kind of crazy, it's changing so fast. No one knows what it's going to be like in 3 months, let alone 3 years. How you can manage that environment where no one ever admits they don't know and no one admits that they haven't got a clue, we are in big trouble. So yes, you've got to create an environment where there's trust and sharing and where people are quite happy to learn from each other and admit what they don't know. And if that starts with the CEO, you've got a much better chance of someone down through the organization admitting it. And that the best learning organizations are one where the CEO says, you can teach me as much as I can teach you. That's the essence of it. So it's a cultural, that's why it's called a learning culture. It's changing the culture in the organization to make learning acceptable and to make, if you like, ignorance acceptable. Not knowing something isn't punishable by being fired or by death. Ignorance is a sign that you're willing to learn. When you admit you don't know something, the next stage is, and I want to find out, and I'm curious and I want to learn. So yes, we have to change fundamentally the way organizations look at themselves. You're quite right.
How do people learn best? And I think my question is by methodology. So
the answer is that is not methodology.
Okay.
The key is if you care. Imagine your life. Everyone who's on this call, on this listening to this webinar, think of a time when you really wanted to learn something, whatever it might have been. You didn't care about the methodology, but you learned. So that if you can create an organization that cares about learning and where people care about understanding that new technology, working something out, solving a problem, the methodology becomes irrelevant. And what worries me is when people say, oh, it only works online, or it only works not online, or you have to have video, or you have to have audio, or it's got to be written down. It's all a load of nonsense because the caring trumps everything else. So that if you can create an environment where people really want to learn, they'll work it out for themselves. Just as if Marion's got young children, they don't sit and ask for the methodology. When they want to learn, they learn. And they learn by being curious and exploring. And Marion creates an environment where they want to learn. She doesn't slap them on the wrists every time they ask a question. Or, if you did that for long enough, you'd create an environment where fear and trust don't exist. But many organizations spend their days slapping the employees on the metaphorical wrist and saying, don't ask questions, don't bother that person, they're too important, don't ever admit you don't know. So it's all about creating that kind of climate where people desperately want the answer, and then they'll work out a way of learning. And if they use Alex's technology, they won't waste their time having to be asked again and again and again the same sort of information. And one of the brilliances of what Alex is demonstrating is that data is going to be massive in learning. Data will help us personalize learning. Data will make sure that I only learn what I need to learn, not everything else. And data will maintain my learning at an optimal level, which is what Blank Slate does. So Blank Slate isn't a learning company, it's a data company. What they do is manage data for learning in such a way as to maximize the efficiency of that learning. How cool is that? Why wouldn't you want that?
And over to Alex. Are you with us again? Can you hear you, Alex?
I am. I don't know what happened there. So, the joys of a tech company, right?
Yeah, exactly. We're all learning. So taking what Nigel just said, and one of the bullet points at the top of this program are related to the low percentage of CEOs who the learning development experts say are actually behind the idea of building a learning organization.
27% was the figure.
So Alex, when you're dealing with a client or a new client for Blank Slate, are you dealing at the CEO level? Is it the department level? Is it a mix? And where are the more fruitful conversations?
Yeah, it is truly a mix, because everyone's going to have a different answer, right? We go back to the difference between, the CFO and the CMO, right? The CEO, that conversation where the CFO will ask, why are we training all these people? They're probably just going to leave us in 5 years anyway. And the CEO asks the question back, it's like, well, what if they don't leave, right? What if we're stuck with them? Where are we then? So it really is a mix of, the learning and development community, the trainers, a lot of the hands-on people certainly want to see the improvement in training and in learning and retention. Whereas certainly the higher up we go on the scale is where kind of the conversation switches a bit, right? Where, great, how are we going to pay for this, right? Everyone has budget cuts, across the board, especially, during the COVID era. But what we're able to do is actually to show the return on investment. We know exactly where our break-even point is. We know how much time we can save people, de facto how much money we can save them as well. So we have an answer, for the CFO and for the CEO at the end of the day.
Of this, I'd like to Nigel for a second, then Marion, I'm going to pull you into this conversation, so you cannot escape, Marion. Here we are sitting in, as Alex noted, the 1 year, I don't want to call it anniversary. The WHO declared this COVID pandemic a year ago today, right? And for Nigel, initially, everybody please feel free to jump in on this. COVID it has significantly changed the world of employers and employees, rocked their world. And suddenly we saw these remote workforces. Some companies were much further down the road in their technology capabilities and having remote workers, let alone the behavior of managing someone remotely. So Nigel, what's your observation of what COVID has done to a learning organization or an organization that was on the road to learning?
I think there are three things that have happened which are really important. The first thing is that hierarchies have become less significant. It's like long, complicated hierarchies meant that nothing got done. And those organizations were punished early on in the days of COVID because people sat back and said, tell me what to do, or I haven't got permission to do that. So hierarchies were diminished. The second thing is that teams solved problems. Teams recognized that if we're going to get any work done, we just got to do this stuff. So they made decisions and they got on and did it. And the most successful teams were the ones who worked together intelligently and went on and solved problems and didn't just hold up their hands in horror. And the third thing was the recognition that the world had changed and there was no point in lamenting the past and saying, oh, if only we had that meeting room, if only we could do this, if only we could do that, and just said, this is what we've got. This is what we're going to have to make do with. So we'll fix, mend and make do and get on and do the job. And companies made the most extraordinary turnarounds. In 7 days, they turned their business model on its head and started to perform in a completely different way. And there were other companies with poor, long hierarchies, poor morale, not learning organizations who were paralyzed weeks into the problem, couldn't get in touch with customers, didn't know how to move forward, couldn't get the IT to work. So it really demonstrated those with a kind of aptitude for problem solving and learning and that innovation economy, those were the organizations that flourished. And it wasn't necessarily that IT was good and retail was bad. Some of the way retail turned on its head and got its business, got its products out of the door in a way that they could never have dreamt a few weeks before was remarkable. And the way that some retail didn't and just froze. It's like they were paralyzed and couldn't do anything months and months later. So it was a real differentiator. I've never believed that COVID has changed anything. All it's done is accelerated trends and tendencies that were already embedded and made them much more apparent. And my naive belief is that I think organizations will emerge from this. If they can stick through it, they will emerge much healthier with a totally different attitude to their staff, with a lot more empowerment and autonomy built in, a lot less hierarchy, and I hope a lot less micromanagement. Because the one thing that failed spectacularly right the way through this pandemic was micromanagement. Because how can you micromanage a remote team? You can't do it. How can you say, I need to see you at 3 o'clock? And they say, well, I've got 2 little kids. I won't be there at 3 o'clock. Tough. Goodbye. It just doesn't work in that environment. You've got to trust people. You've got to let them get on and do it. You've got to let them make decisions, whatever those decisions are, and not punish them if they're wrong, but learn from them if they weren't the most brilliant decision. So all of that stuff is really important, I think. And definitely organizations are moving step by step to see the value of learning. And so I hope that 27% figure of CEOs is up from 27% now. And in 6 months' time, it will be up again, and 6 months after that, up again, till it's 80% of CEOs, not 27%. Because that's the truth, you know. You need learning in organizations to survive.
You know, Marion, you know, we mentioned innovation economy, and Nigel just dropped the magic phrase of that as well. You know, you were involved heavily in the successful win of Amazon HQ2, an innovative company. And I'm curious if when you were working with that, and that was an incredibly competitive bid nationwide. And here, Northern Virginia, in particular Arlington County, was able to secure that. But what role did a qualified workforce play in Amazon's decision?
Well, actually, John, it was the number one factor. You know, when we were going through the competitive process and responding to RFI, and it was, I mean, a massive, massive data pull. And there were a lot of questions about talent, starting with K to 12, all the way to very, very specific job sets like UX, UI, and machine learning, the number of, you know, skilled employees in these various categories. But that was in addition to data on transportation, on what was happening in our community. It was really, across a very, very broad swath of questions they had. But the data that we gathered was very compelling. I mean, you may or may not know this, but the DC Metro is actually number 2, just behind New York, in terms of the size of our STEM talent pool, and also in the production of tech degrees in the U.S. And we compiled a lot of data, as did Amazon. As you know, they're very good with data to support our proposal. And they were really looking at, of course, they needed a place for their headquarters, right? And we're very excited they chose Arlington. But they were really looking much more broadly at the region. And as we all know, talent is a regional asset. And Northern Virginia stacks up really, really well in terms of the pool that's already here, but also what's coming down the pike. You also may know that the package that the state of Virginia delivered to incentivize Amazon to choose Virginia for its second headquarters included investments into the STEM pipeline, again, starting K-12 all the way up through master's. It's over $1 billion in investment. So I think where we are right now is really unrivaled if you look across the country in terms of investments that are being made. And it really, really helps us when we're trying to attract and retain exciting companies like Blank Slate and Amazon and across the gamut, these companies that are very innovative that we want to attract here to grow and diversify our economy.
So in your role with innovation economy, sort of trying to magnify that within the county, that's a consistent thread. It's not just Amazon HQ too, that was focused on the workforce, right? But rather the whole idea of, and it's funny because I had these conversations fairly often at the county level and the state level, where everybody has a differentiator, right? You could be out in a rural section and you've got green space for setting up a data center and relatively inexpensively. But where you are, and heck, I used to work at Arlington County for a decade. In fact, I could see behind you the bridge I used to cross over on my bicycle to go to work.
Oh, there you go.
In courthouse. But that has got to be, yes, you're close into DC, you've got multiple metro stops, and there's all of that. But yet you didn't go there. You said it was the people that was a differentiator. Can you talk about that? And is it statistically based on education or on skills?
Yeah, so we have Arlington has among its accolades a strange or interesting claim to fame of having the most highly educated workforce on a per capita basis at a county level. And so we have, I think it's something like over 3/4 of our population with a bachelor's degree, almost 40% with at least one advanced degree. So we stack up really well. And, this is probably something both Alex and Nigel could attest to, but when we talk to employers, it's across sectors, but when we talk to especially high growth and tech employers, that the number one thing is talent. So how to attract that talent, how to retain that talent. So we spend a lot of time, thinking through our role in that, programs that we can develop, partnerships that we can advance with universities and the state of Virginia to continue to keep an edge there, because it's kind of the race for talent, and there's shortage almost everywhere you look, especially for high growth sectors. And so you'll probably see this is a big area of focus for a lot of communities, and we feel very fortunate that hopefully this stays true post-COVID, but this is one of our great strengths that seems to be weathering quite well through COVID, and hopefully will continue to attract a lot of interest in companies locating in this area.
The other phenomenon with COVID is sadly there will be millions and millions of currently unemployed or furloughed people whose jobs will never come back, and they tend to be in the less skilled areas of the economy. Whether it's hospitality or retail and other areas, but that the idea of retraining and reinvesting in training, is that something that you've experienced already in Arlington County? And if so, what are your plans about it?
Yeah, so I think it really depends on, when you think about the displaced worker, what they were doing before they were displaced, and kind of at what level they were employed. We find that some of the more highly skilled employees that are, unfortunately laid off in some of, hospitality sectors, tourism, have been able to move into other career paths, whether that's government, nonprofits, associations. There's been a little bit more of a pathway there. It's the less skilled workers, I think, where we're seeing more of the impact. There's a lot of work being done at the county level. We have a regional workforce council that has specific programs on reskilling, upskilling, and we've seen a lot of communities roll out similar programs. I think the hard part is sort of matching those who are displaced and finding a good place for them to find work in the sectors that are growing. I mean, we're very fortunate in Arlington. I think in this area in general, we have, the federal government has fared quite well. Government contractors that support federal government are also doing well. Of course, tech companies, consulting, professional service, there's a high representation of those companies here who all, worked well and were able to operate pretty successfully, even in a remote environment, bumpy, but successful. And so, we've been thinking about what can our role be to take some of the perhaps more highly skilled employees that are coming out of hospitality sector or nonprofit sector that are used to working in professional environments, have college degrees, have some aptitude for technology, and work to get them those certifications and build up those skills so that they can join all of these companies that are still growing and advertising jobs and unable to fill the roles because it's such a competitive world for tech talent. So we're working on an apprenticeship program that we're exploring with some organizations. We have them in this area that do sort of professional apprenticeship models for exactly this reason.
A question, sorry, Nigel, you're on mute. I was just going to ask that a question, but go ahead. I'll see if we're on the same page.
We probably are. We think alike, John.
Please.
What I was going to say was that one important part of that equation, which often is overlooked, and I don't think it should be, is that it's not just about skills, it's about mental aptitude, and it's about tools. So I always say it's not skill set, but skill set, mindset, tool set. So that if you've got someone who believes they can learn, regardless of where they're starting, you've really got a leg up against someone maybe who's more highly skilled, more highly qualified, who's got it ingrained in his or her head that that's it. They can't learn new skills. It's too difficult. It's something that they really don't want to struggle with. They give up at the first obstacle. So part of the challenge is to really imbue in those people the kind of generic skills that they possess. In hospitality, there's a lot of leadership skills, interpersonal skills, people skills. There's an awful lot embedded in a role that the role might not exist any longer, but potentially they have got very powerful roles in organizations, running projects, running teams, all sorts of things. But they've got to believe that. Yeah, exactly. Client-facing
and
stuff.
It's interesting because that is also a common complaint we hear from our tech companies who maybe they find these great, technically qualified folks, but then the soft skills, the social skills, the client-facing, comfort, ability to kind of put them in front of a client and not worry about it, presentation skills, all of those things, so it's really interesting when you think about being able to help create some of those pathways, to address both of those gaps. So we've been doing quite a bit of work with that, and kind of speaking to this culture of innovation, if you think about it, our role in the government, economic development, is really, or for my team anyway, is really to help support companies that are here and support our community to always stay ahead of the curve and alongside sectors that are growing. And the landscape, the world that we work in, changes all the time. And so, it's dynamic, which makes it fun, makes it also crazy. Doing what we do during COVID was, like for everybody else, had to learn a lot of new things. But we're constantly having to innovate. What are the needs in the business community at the moment? Are we staffed appropriately? Do we need to create a new position which we did actually focused mostly on talent and university partnerships because it's such a critical issue for our clients. So, just kind of by virtue of the work we do, we find that we have to kind of stay on our toes and try and embed a culture of continuous learning that Nigel was talking about earlier.
I'm interested in this topic when you mentioned nonprofit organizations and certifications, and you sort of have this new world where not everybody has the opportunity to secure a 4-year degree and an advanced degree, and that's the traditional path that many of us took. But so two things have happened, it seems. One is that's less available often, less readily available, I should say. And two, there are other avenues to one's career advancement. So my question to Alex is, when you are working with clients, does that ever enter the conversation, either maintaining credentials or achieving credentials that are frankly part of the training that you're reinforcing and their advancement?
Yeah, so twofold on that, just to go back to the point of retraining people, and it's the statistic you showed in the beginning, that I forget the percentage need to be retrained by 2022, but that was a statistic from 2018.
Yeah.
Right. So that doesn't even take COVID into account, because something that we're seeing right now, back in the corporate sense, and with retail starting to come back, is not really retraining, but it's almost a re-onboarding of employees who haven't been on the sales force, on the sales floor for a year, and haven't thought about the products that they sell, and need to get that all back up to speed quickly. And obviously, companies don't have that classroom environment anymore to train them. They can't send everybody to, everyone come over to Arlington for the next week from the national sales force and train here for a week. It's not happening anymore, right? So this is something that we've seen a resurgence on the slow trickle back to retail. But that's been a very, very big sector for us. But going back to, sorry, I lost my thought.
Professional certification is matter.
Professional certifications, yeah. We see this a lot on the health and safety side. So I dealt with a company a few weeks back that told me they do all of their mandatory training in January, so that they get it out of the way for the rest of the year. Now, it doesn't matter what you're doing, but in December, you're not going to be able to recall that information from January. Since we deal with individual users' information with their content that they've created, which may have been already come pre-certified, we're reinforcing that information. So it actually gets accredited to a certain level. In some degrees, with law enforcement, our officers get full credit for every tenth of a second they're on our software. But it allows for that recertification to happen in a mobile environment as opposed to that classroom environment. And certainly, I don't know if you're watching this hour-long webinar, what you're actually listening to, or if you're doing your laundry, or whatever the case may be. But certainly we can track that on the software, we can track that user engagement. And that really does keep everyone accountable from the very top of the organization to the bottom in full transparency.
Well, it shouldn't be surprising. The audience should know that there is a quiz at the bottom of this webinar. So it is mandatory. But
can't leave until you take the quiz.
Right.
Can't leave until you pass the quiz.
I want to just throw a question that occurred to me toward Nigel, but please everybody jump in. I have a personal experience as a manager of an organization where I was asked to come in a particular role as a COO and do all the things we learn in business school, right? Thrust power deeply into the organization, create a team's environment. And, I'm a bit of a cheerleader, so I was happily doing that. And it came from, and the reason I was asked to come in, that the CEO is a very top-down, detail-oriented control personality. Not to criticize him, but his style was a one-to-many style, right? I was shocked when my millennial team of millennials, about 35 millennials, mostly millennials, 20s and 30s years of age, and I came in, I gave all the speeches and all that, and they were exceedingly reluctant to take the reins, to make decisions, to own parts of the business. And I thought for a moment, is this some sort of Stockholm syndrome, that they don't either believe that this change is occurring, or that they're so ingrained in the previous behavior But Nigel, is that a fair question?
Absolutely, it's a fair question. I think the answer is you've answered it, and it's people are reluctant to believe that there's real change because there's a sense that, well, he may be just bluffing, or it may all change. He may disappear, and someone else will come in, and I'm going to get punished for this. Let me not make a decision. If I don't make any decisions, I can't do anything wrong. And where you have organizations where the culture is focused on never making a mistake rather than actually doing anything useful, it's toxic. So that it takes more than, sadly, John, it takes more than just a rousing speech from you for people to actually believe that something had changed. Now, that is the first step. And by the way, Paola Gianovetti sent a little message in chat saying, by the way, I'm listening, I'm not doing my washing. So there we go, Alex, you see, there's life out there, totally go Paola, yeah, go Paola. So I think that to get a shift in culture is a slow, patient process, but it happens. The problem is that many CEOs, you may be a notable exception, John, think that all of this stuff can be done overnight. Because they want it, they think that everyone else should want it. And because they get it, they expect everyone else to get it. The truth is that it is a lot trickier, just as Marion will discover as she's trying to get people to think about potential new roles for themselves. It's not just a case of man saying, yeah, you could do that. It takes a lot more to get the genuine ownership and the mental switch to believe, well, I could run that bit of John's organization. I could actually take on that new role. That's why you've got to pay attention to this stuff. Our brain has habits, and these habits form easily and are difficult to shift. And one habit is, I can't do that. That's too difficult. I'm very lowly. I don't make decisions. No one wants to give me any leadership experience. And once that's lodged, you've got to dislodge it. And that takes more than just a rousing speech, sadly. So this is really important stuff, because this is not a challenge for, a few hundred people. This is millions of Americans are going to have to face exactly these questions, and they have to be treated with respect, and they have to recognize that it doesn't happen just because you want it to. You've got to give them the chance, and you've got to shift the mindset as well as create the tool set. So this is we're putting our finger on something really, really important for the economic well-being of the whole country going forward after this chaos that we've come through. How can we get back to something more approaching a steady state? Probably never a steady state. And the answer is going to take a lot of hard work, and probably a lot more hard work than most people recognize. So it's a really good question, John.
To the audience, I just want to remind you, we are taking questions. If you have questions, just throw them in there. It's a safe environment, so just go ahead and ask a question. There's no judgment. This is a no judgment zone. So go ahead and ask any question you want. But I'm going to ask Marion a question. Your background in particular, I noticed that you grew up overseas. You've been working in international arena for years. You work for U.S. Trade and Development, part of the Department of Commerce, I'm pretty sure, right?
It started out there, yeah, it spun out.
But what do you observe as an American who spent most of her life overseas, her young life overseas? Do you observe cultural differences in learning or in organizational behavior? And then before you answer, Alex quickly corrected me. Of the 4 people on this panel, I'm the only one who grew up in the United States. So, but Marion, please jump in. Alex and Nigel both too.
Yeah, and welcome Alex and Nigel weighing in too. But I think, so I was a liberal arts undergrad, and lived in lots of different countries, mostly in Europe. But I studied Russian, and I lived there for a bit after university and worked in a Russian firm, and I got to know, the culture quite well. And I was always so amazed by the fact they could recite poetry, and literature and things that, even if I'd worked really hard in university, I probably wouldn't be able to do. I tried, and that's part of their educational system, is sort of rote memorization. Something I've noticed, that is a real strength with our education system, and having grown up, and gone to a liberal arts university, is the critical thinking functions, and practice constantly being asked, for opinions and to support those opinions, and going through that diligence of, formulating, and it gives you, some autonomous thinking. I think you can find that in individuals regardless of cultures they come in, but I think, the more accepting that culture is of the individual against sort of the collective, and it's not a sign of disrespect if you ask questions, it's encouraged. Those are the kind of things that I think, really help with this kind of the innovation and the continuous learning. And I've worked, in local government, federal government, private sector, large, small, huge, ExxonMobil Corporation, huge company, global, very, a lot of process there and a lot of similarity. You could take your card and log in a US office and then fly to Singapore, log in, and it's like you're in the exact same place. But I find that the workplaces that I've been in that encourage some of the stuff Nigel talked about earlier, encourage you to make mistakes. You're not going to get your head chopped off, and not looking at people's status in the workplace, because sometimes someone who's working at the front desk has some really, really great observations about ways you can improve your things that may seem out of their purview. I think, I would just say it's not so much culture, it's just kind of like countrywide or nationwide. It's more kind of the cultures in which you are educated and grow and work that really contribute to that. I don't know, Alex, Nigel, if you guys have any other.
No, I definitely agree. I think a lot of the importance is being allowed to ask why and being allowed to fail, having that curiosity of how can we make this a better process. And that was, a lot of what charged Blank Slate in its early days, is trying to rethink, why don't I remember the last training I went to? Why is this a problem? What can we do to better the process? And being allowed to fail. Nigel, you touched on this a few times. It's, being able to take that risk, being able to fail. It's something that's very unique to the culture here. I come from Germany. I studied in Austria. It's very conservative. It's like everything has its way. Everything needs to be done the same way it's been done for the past, 250 years. But I think here very much you see a very a large difference in the way of thinking, and that allowing to almost, it's sometimes easier to ask for forgiveness than it is for permission. Let's just go try it and see if it works.
You're luring Jeff Bezos into Arlington, and Jeff Bezos has his rule of 6, and that is he doesn't ask why. He asks, why did that happen? And why did that cause that to happen? And he goes down, he claims that you need to go down 6 layers before you get to the root cause. And I think that ability to see round corners and to recognize that what confronts you isn't necessarily the ultimate truth, that sometimes you have to probe and dig deeper and question and ask more questions. I think these are really important characteristics of learning organizations, and will become increasingly characteristics for survival. We need people who don't rush to decision and rush to answers, but hold back and can manage contradiction and manage challenge and confusion to come to a better answer ultimately. So I think someone said, it was maybe Albert Einstein, that it's not what someone knows that's important, it's the questions they ask that's important. Because you find that those people who you admire for their intellectual prowess are the ones who ask questions, because they're curious and they never are never satisfied. It's the people who think they know enough, or I'm good to go. They're the people you've got to worry about, because they're the ones who've had a real struggle trying to adapt to this ridiculous climate that we've all come through. The people who were flexible, willing to give it a go, willing to try, asking questions, how does that work and how do we use that? It's quite interesting how some people have flourished, really flourished, and some people have come really unstuck, and it's all to do with that attitude. So I think that part of Marion's job in her development role is to encourage people to ask those kinds of open questions and not be afraid of that, and to have an inquiring mind as well as an ability to learn. These things are fundamental, aren't they? I think increasingly as we go forward.
Well, I want to thank the panel for kind of coming up to the top of the hour. My agreement with the audience is I will never go over that time limit. So we're closing in on it. This has been a really great conversation. I am personally very interested in this topic, and I hadn't thought I really would be, to be honest with you. But I am just really interested in this now. I hope the audience has found some really useful points. I will have this video, the very brief presentation will be posted on novaeda.org. It should be up by COB tomorrow at the latest. And also Nova EDA through Arlington County is chapterizing. How's that for a word? Chapterizing the discussion so that you don't have to listen to my monotone drone as moderator. I want to thank the panel very much and thank the audience. The next webinar for the Catalyst for Change series will be on April 1st, and it's entitled How Diversity Makes Organizations Stronger. And so that's going to be a very important, and actually it is the natural webinar to follow this one. It just occurs to me. So I want to thank the audience, thank the panel, wonderful chat, and have a great rest of your day, folks. Thank you.
And don't forget Paola as well. Paola, our interrogator in the chat box. Thank you, Paola, for sticking with us all the way through. So thanks a lot. Thanks, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.